Welcome back, Reg audience, and we're delighted to have you back. We've been away for a while, and as you will notice, while we have been away, we have redecorated. Look at this, isn't it terrific? We've got the Reg Vulture has come to join us for our Regcasts now. This is exactly what the Reg offices look like. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending that we're in the Reg audience, like, you know, Nigella's cooking at home or anything like that. But it's great. I love our new studio, and I've got all sorts of new devices. If the whole thing collapses halfway through, blame me. Don't blame the other guys, because it's probably my fault. So let me use the new technology to tell you what we're doing today, location in the cloud. Now, this is a big Regcast, and I know it's something that all of you have at least thought about, and a lot of you have commented about, a great deal of you have commented about, very often in the strongest terms, about the problems of where to put your data and whether indeed you should move any data outside of your organization. So we're going to be dealing with all those things today, and we're going to be dealing with them, I think, quite straightforwardly. I was having a look at some of the stuff that we've got, and I think it's not waffle. We'll see how that works. So let me tell you exactly why we're dealing with this. Location matters. Who changed my slide? It's got impacts on it now. I just hate this tired management stuff. Location matters because it affects all of these things: performance, cost, compliance, stakeholder perception, security, privacy, data protection, DR decisions. We've got a lot to get through. Who's going to get through it with us? Actually, before I do that, I need to remind you to ask questions. Now, normally I would tell you exactly what's above our heads. We've also changed the way the thing looks. I can't see what you see at the moment, it occurs to me. So just press the button to ask questions. Don't complain afterwards that we didn't answer your point, because you didn't ask it. If you ask it, it comes to my little thing here, and then I'll ask it to these guys. Who am I going to ask it to? Well, at the far end today, we have Nigel. Nigel from IBM. Nigel, welcome.
How do you do?
What do you do at IBM, Nigel?
I've been with IBM for a very long time. For the last sort of 12 or 13 years, I've been involved in our infrastructure outsourcing. Right today, I moved over at the beginning of last year into run our cloud division within our services group. So I've been involved deeply with our cloud plans for the last 15 months or so.
You started in the typewriter group or something like that?
Not quite that far back.
You started when you still had
I do have grey hairs, so you can go back
yes.
into the 80s for my start date, yes.
All right, that's terrific. And joining you, Nigel, Priti, welcome to the studio.
Welcome.
Now, Priti, you work for Acuutech.
I do.
That's not
indeed.
how you pronounce it, is it?
It's Acuutech.
Okay, what does Acuutech do?
Acuutech is a managed service provider. We've been established for just under 2 decades. And you might ask why I'm on this panel.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
I thought I'd ask for you. Predominantly, I really want to share our real-life experience over the 2 decades, as we've been an early adopter of the cloud technology since 2002.
And you deal with people who are like the Reg audience.
We do indeed.
Yeah, all the time, because they're your customers. So you know the sort of things that they're asking.
Yes.
So you're prepared for anything.
We'll give it a go. We'll give it a go.
So we'll see how it works. And back to the studio. We've changed many things, but one thing we have not changed. We could never change you, Dale.
Hey.
Because we couldn't find anyone to change you for. No, so Dale, but I was saying, I was joking about how this is something that everyone's got a strong opinion on at the moment. Reg readers do have a strong opinion, but that matters, isn't it? It's not just people having opinions. This really matters.
Yeah. There's what I'd say is a lot of people have opinions, but sometimes they kind of focus on not necessarily the complete picture. And I think there's some things that are pretty obvious that you can talk about in this area, but there's some other things that may be less obvious that we're going to be picking up hopefully as we go through this discussion today. Good,
excellent. Well, let's get on with the discussion then. We have, again, one thing that we really haven't changed is that we've got, we've got your slides. So Dale, what have you pulled out here that you think is important to set us up?
Well, one of the things, I mean, there's 2 kinds of discussions that I tend to have at the moment as an analyst. One of them is, that kind of immediate discussion around Snowden and NSA and Patriot Act and all that kind of stuff. And location comes up, and we should hold on to our data locally. But as you know, we do a lot of fairly sort of to-the-point research where we're asking fairly to-the-point questions in a sort of practical, real-world context. And the interesting thing is that when you ask about location in that way, it tends not to come out as strongly. If you look at the chart that we've got here, for instance, the location of your data, when you're looking at what you should care about when evaluating service providers, tends to actually come fairly low down the list. But as you'll see as we go through the conversation today, some of the other things that come out near the top, things like performance, quality of service, those kind of things, are actually can be directly impacted by location. So there are other reasons in the, you know, some of the more headline-grabbing stuff that you should be worrying about this stuff at the moment.
Sometimes that gets buried in a discussion, doesn't it? Some of these other things, but they're pretty important. So let's have a look also on this. So, how much do these statements apply?
So this is basically one of the things we are going to be touching on. It is obviously the security and compliance thing. What Reg readers tell us is, most people, there's no surprise on this slide, Tim.
I was going to say it's one of your least surprising slides.
I know. Just to ground us really in reality. Most people have got confidential information. Most people are subject to some kind of regulation, even if they're in the UK, for instance, just the UK Data Protection Act. Most people sort of think about these things, but not necessarily in the context of cloud historically. They've thought about them in other contexts. So we're going to be bringing those into the cloud today. Sometimes fewer people tell us that regulation actually dictates where they should be storing things. And what we do pick up is, I think that bottom bar there that you can see, 1 in 5 organisations, largely speaking, say we just don't outsource, we don't store our data outside of our own servers and storage infrastructure, mainly because we don't know what we should and shouldn't be doing. So it's kind of more of a defensive.
We don't know, so we just know to do nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. Better not to take the risk. So we'll just keep it in house.
You're nodding along there, Nigel. Do you get that from people when you go and try and sell your cloud stuff to them? Do they say no, it's not?
Some people have an antipathy to the word cloud and anything to do with it, based on sometimes on ignorance, sometimes on knowledge, and so. The security is obviously a high up on that list of, they can't, we can put it outside the firewall. I would predict that within 5 years we'll have a bank in the UK running its major services on a cloud platform.
Oh, which one's it going to be?
I won't predict. I won't predict that.
Yes, you're selling to them at the moment. That's why it is. Yeah. Priti, same question for you. Do you get guys who are just saying no, we can't? We're completely closed to this.
We do, but we find a lot of it's to do with fear factor and engagement from the IT people with the actual corporate people within the company. And if that engagement is in place, we find all of these points that you've raised on this slide actually are not that important. Oh.
Okay, we'll find out
in the real life.
We'll find out what is important in a minute. So that's it. Now, first of all, we need to talk about SoftLayer. What is this SoftLayer thing of which you speak, Nigel? This is your thing, isn't it?
There's 2 areas we've got with SoftLayer, and we've got a managed service platform that's cloud-oriented.
And we're going to we talk about both.
Talk about both, but just to try and position a little bit about SoftLayer and that platform and what we're doing to give some context to the rest of the discussion during the hour. We bought SoftLayer about July last year. And really that's what competes with the Amazons and the Microsofts of this world in terms of a very strong infrastructure as a service platform. Since then it's been going like hotcakes.
You've got a lot of competition there.
We have very strong competitors, but it's a very strong platform and quite well differentiated in terms of the control you can have of the platform through the APIs. There are about 2,000 APIs. One of the significant things from a compliance point of view, I'm sure we'll touch on, is around being able to get down to the serial number of the box you're working on and knowing which data center you're in. So the data location aspects of that it is quite strongly differentiated on. But it's not the be-all and end-all, because we've got a further investment in numbers of different data centers that we can just show on the next chart as well.
Oh. It's a little prompt to pick up your clicker, Tim.
Right, thanks very much. And so, as I said, we have 2 platforms, the SoftLayer side and the Cloud Managed Services.
Yeah.
The Cloud Managed Services has got a full ITIL process stack around it, and that's where we tend to put SAP or Oracle applications and have them hosted as a platform as a service, whereas the SoftLayer, the sort of the legacy type applications on that platform, and the new applications sort of born on the cloud would tend to start on the SoftLayer side. And so that's why we've got 2, because there's a lot of legacy applications out there that need a cloud treatment. And so that's the way we've designed our platforms.
Now, you acquired SoftLayer.
Correct.
Why?
In order to fill, frankly, a hole in our portfolio that the Amazons and the Microsofts have been, with Azure, have been strongly competitive in, and it's an emerging category. SoftLayer started off in 2005 and has been going at this for a long time, so it's a highly functional system. It's very, very difficult to develop that and catch up and with either SoftLayer or the Amazons or the Microsofts. So people who are considering trying to build their own cloud platforms have to put it in the context of sort of major players doing that, and even we as IBM would have found it difficult to have spent the money fast enough to develop the function to compete in that environment. So SoftLayer is now a very strong focus for us in that particular segment of the market.
State companies don't usually have trouble spending money fast, do they? Especially when it comes to like saying, Dale, is it easy to differentiate between cloud services at the moment, or I mean, clearly Nigel's going to say we're different because. Is this accurate?
Well, it's good timing on the part of IBM. Essentially, there's been two parallel tracks of activity going on in, if we genericize it and call it the hosting arena. One of them is around the whole, Amazon started it with the whole public cloud, elastic resource availability, and all this kind of stuff, and until relatively recently, actually, most of the activity on that has not been big production systems. More recently, we've seen people starting to put really busy sort of websites, externally facing web applications, that kind of thing, on those kind of environments. Meanwhile, though, going back decades, people have been hosting stuff on grown-up IBM platforms, for example, hosting environments, and that's gradually morphed into more of a sort of managed service play. And we have seen a lot of people putting very heavy, SAP workloads and those kind of things into that kind of environment. But I think what's happened is these two, what research is telling us is that as people have got more experience, they've been doing this for a lot longer, and that's kind of been on a trajectory. This is newer, but it's starting to come into its own now, and people are starting to do real things with it. And actually they're realizing that what you really need is to mix and match these as part of your IT delivery strategy. So depending on the workload of the application, you may put it here or you may put it here, and that's why having providers who can actually provide you with some choice is a good thing. So it's good timing in the market from an IBM perspective.
All right, and that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of the hour, basically, is helping people to work out what to put where and on what service. And for that, we also need to know a little bit more about Acuutech. Priti, so tell us where you fit into this picture.
Most certainly. As I said, Acuutech is a managed service provider. We've been around for 2 decades, and we're one of the early adopters of cloud technology since 2002. Today we host around about 350 applications in the cloud, and we find that most of these applications are legacy applications. And
like, for example?
They're going to be fat client applications which don't necessarily lend itself going into a web environment for a delivery straight away, and therefore they need to be worked with the providers to make sure that they can get up into the cloud environment, i.e. give you that flexibility to work in that remote location that the cloud is all about. So we sort of have seen a journey, if you like. Our cloud journey is all about standardization of IT, it's gone through consumerization of IT, and now it's all about global presence. Our bit with SoftLayer, if you like, is almost giving us that global reach. And how did it begin? Our journey began with a requirement based in our Singapore office, where we had a choice of investing in a traditional data center environment versus considering something like SoftLayer. For us, SoftLayer was a perfect choice. Why was it the perfect choice? Because A, speed, getting to market. It gave us the flexibility in terms of virtualization platforms, in terms of a technical thing. It gave us bare metal provisioning for the requirements that we needed out there. They're the technical reasons, but it also answered a lot of other things for us in terms of, we chose SoftLayer because they had points of presence in the areas our clients were actually based. So in the regions where our clients were, SoftLayer was predominantly based. And
so where's that sort of thing? Where did you give your pops?
Predominantly in Singapore is where we really have focused here, and we found that overcome things like compliance by creating local zones for our client data, and data sovereignty is being ticked in terms of some of the things that our clients will look at. So that's how our relationship began with SoftLayer, and that's the sort of things that we're finding that we're really taking advantage of today.
Okay, well let's start to break these problems down. We've got quite a few to get through when it comes down to these problems. So let's have a look first of all at performance. Now this is your slide, isn't it, Nigel?
Yeah, I can talk to a little bit of this, and please chip in. Don't consider it as mine,
we will.
I'm sure. I'm sure. If I take the first scenario and around location, there is a trade-off here with numbers of different costs in the performance side, and so we're talking to a number of clients around fast-moving consumer goods in various areas around their SAP systems and or their Oracle applications, and the trend is to move, if you like, from the scenario C at the bottom, where they've got multiple distributed platforms often around the globe, into putting one centrally, and that's ideally suited. You can put that in clearly in any of our data centers that have got the cloud managed services platform that are running those services. And head towards that direction. The scenario B with performance and cost, we've got clients, I don't know, there's a university we've just been working with recently that signed up that we will be using for our big launch of the SoftLayer presence that we're building in the UK in the second quarter. And they've come to us because rather than performance and cost specifically, it's to do with the affinity with the UK. You know, being a public institution in the UK, they want to put the data here, and so they've chosen to do that on the SoftLayer side. And then we're talking to numbers of clients who've got then a hybrid environment, if you like, almost in the scenario C. So if you've got an SAP service, for example, centrally, you may want to put all the web services based out dispersed geographically around in the different organisations. So you've got the capability to deploy those on the SoftLayer ones when we've built those out around the world as well. And so there's a very much a mix and match, catering for different requirements.
And so there's a few things that come up. Well, I mean, there's hundreds of things we could talk of for this. But first of all, we've got to get into the problem of latency, and where does latency become important and when is it not important, and for what applications. And so one of the points of being local is you cut down your latency,
Correct, absolutely. And so we've got our Portsmouth location for our cloud managed services, and we're opening the second quarter a site in the London, it may not within the M25. And so that latency requirement in applications, part of the difficulty is often you don't know. You know, if you're running it in your data center, you're concerned, is it too far away to be in? There are a couple of competitors are in Dublin, you know, and we think, well, actually, it's much better to be near the population and have lower risk of a latency issue, when the cost of setting up and testing it and working out whether latency is a problem for that particular application you've been running for a while is just painful when you don't know. So rather reduce the risk and have the data much more locally in the UK, which is what we're catering for in a very deliberate strategy with our clients to meet that.
Dale, actually, we got the question. Actually, I'm going to leave that question actually that we've got here, because it's a compliance one, and we've got some great stuff on compliance later on, and so we're really going to get into that properly, I hope. So please do ask some more of those questions. That's a great from Fernando. Hang on to that one. Just keep watching, and it'll be great for you. On this, Dale. On this idea of latency, what's sensitive to latency? I mean, because everyone asks for low latency. Does it matter?
There's a certain... Back up a little bit.
Back up.
As people have gotten used to higher performance, just on the web in general, and I think we've all seen various studies and surveys that have been done that say that if a website doesn't respond within less than a second, say, or 3 seconds max, then the user walks. The same actually applies to business applications, except that if you've got an employee who's sitting there waiting for something to respond, and they've just got a very sluggish response, they can't walk, obviously, but what they can do is give IT a really hard time and start escalating problems back through and saying this thing is getting in the way of us actually doing our jobs. So there's a big perception thing, and what's happened over the years actually is the tolerance of high latency just in general within business as well as consumers has just got much lower. So we just expect things to be at a certain level. Then there are certain applications in certain scenarios, and the ultimate is trading applications, for instance, in a financial
well, you have context. To be extremely local, to be effective.
Exactly, yes. and their latency is the tolerance is much lower. And when you bring background, automated processing into the mix as well, that doesn't involve a user, then obviously the difference between a few milliseconds can actually be very, very significant. So IBM's got a lot of experience with this.
It's part of the deliberate strategy. So the building out all of the SoftLayer data centers, for example, we've specifically stated we'll build them all next to the major financial centers in the world for exactly that reason. And so you'll find over 2014 we'll open up London, Frankfurt, Paris, Hong Kong's just opened a couple of weeks ago, a couple in Australia, Japan, and so Brazil now also opening up to cater for the markets down there. So it's a deliberate strategy to locate next to those markets for exactly that reason. Why eliminate a section of the market that you could serve? So
it's pretty basic. I mean, it does make a high-stakes game, doesn't it?
It does indeed. And there are an awful lot of applications that are not cloud ready either. So my advice to the audience would be, these legacy applications that we're talking about.
Yeah.
You need to work with your providers to make sure that you prepare those applications for your critical business needs. Go through a testing phase with your provider to make sure it does deliver what you want.
So these are applications with very sort of chatty protocols that are really hitting your network quite hard.
Technology is moving on, but as an example, there are graphical requirements, and these sort of things really need to be tested when we're talking about latency.
Yeah, and latency really, I mean, the effect of latency gets magnified with some of those sort of legacy applications that aren't tuned for that sort of wide area sort of environment.
I've got a question just come in here actually from Andy, and it says, in our company we've got a gigabit LAN internally with 1 millisecond ping times. How does this compare to a remote data center, even if it's located in the same country? Well, he's got you beat, hasn't he?
Yes, on a 1 millisecond LAN, for sure.
Yeah. But the broader question, I guess, so yes, there's no reason, if he's happy managing that, then, and that's really important to him, then he's going to take a hit as soon as he starts moving things out to the cloud. For other people, how much of a noticeable hit are they likely to take? It's a big question.
I can't remember off the top of my head. We've got Portsmouth and Warwick data centres, and the latency we've set up between those is very low on fibre connectivity. And so the cost trade-off of having high capacity bandwidth but between data centres and for connectivity, the ever decreasing cost of that is making that much more accessible. So the actual latency loss, it's not much more than a millisecond times to get between those two data centres. And so unless you're really in those trading applications that have that sort of millisecond response, then it should not be a problem. Many, many more applications are becoming suitable for it now.
But it does come back to a trade-off, doesn't it? Now, well, the application obviously is very application dependent, but one of the points that you have on this chart is cost of transport and quality of service, because you can buy better performance if you want to. It helps if you have a local point of presence, obviously, that you hook into, and obviously that's totally different to going in over the internet.
So we've just been working with a client, the university I mentioned, and they had 400 odd servers and services, and we went through an analysis by application of every single one, and they'd just recently put in some applications that they felt were very low latency. But when you work with the suppliers of those applications and go through the actual checklist, we got down to a list, I think, of around about 20 in the end that were ones that you might want to leave locally because of various risks. The other 400 and odd were all suitable for putting on the cloud. So people can cling on to I want it here and I don't want to take a risk. It's important to balance off what level of risk you're actually taking.
You go through that process when it comes to for performance terms. Some things it is going to matter. I see what you're saying there, Priti. Stuff that's constantly going backwards and forwards. Other stuff, but you just have to know. You have to go through this process, application by application. Gosh, that's quite a lot of work. Don't start that until after you've finished on the Regcast.
But to be honest, I mean, it's not as hard as you might think, because I mean, if you look at your business, you know what are your core applications. If you're running a really busy call center with really high throughput and fast response, so a lot of short calls that need a fast response, then obviously that's a critical application. You've got to pay attention to that. So normally these things stand out.
Good. Let's get on to the thing that everyone's worried about: compliance, and compliance, perception, trust, security. We've lumped them all together, and so on that. So who wants to explain about what we're going to talk about with compliance? Priti, do you want to start us off on this?
Oh dear. Well, what I can say to the audience and in their favour is, Is it a problem or is it overstated? It is certainly not overstated, and it is a problem for a lot of the companies we certainly deal with today. So, for example, we have a lot of professional services clients which consist of legal and financial services. In both these industries, they're heavily regulated by compliance, and in particular they look at things like the data protection stuff, which I know we're going to come on to later on, but they're looking at things like Principle 7, you know, the information security, where is it handled, how is it handled, and where is the data stored, Principle 8, in terms of is it within the economic union or not. So the regional stuff comes into play. But we also find two types of customers. There's a customer that says, I need to comply for it, and here's a piece of paper. Because it's written on a piece of paper, they think they comply and that's good enough. And then we find the other side of the business, which is, great, it's a piece of paper, but we never put it into practice. And they want you to actually show that this is actually in practice and go through their due diligence properly.
So it's two completely different sets of people, isn't it?
Two different types of people.
Out of interest, how many do you come across who are, you know, forget the compliance? Because a lot of compliance really is sort of trying to encourage you or force you to do things that are probably quite good for your business anyway. It doesn't apply to all regulations, but you know, a lot of it does. How many come along and say, well, actually, we're more concerned about business risk and reputational risk, and you know, if we do have a breach, for instance, then we're not worried about non-compliance. We're worried about damage to our business.
Very low.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Very low. I think what we found over the years, and bearing in mind we've been doing this since 2002, it's all about having a trusted provider that you're working with, and if you have built a relationship with your providers, they don't ask questions, which is not always the right way, because they should ask questions.
You should certainly ask questions about this to protect yourself.
But they don't, in reality.
Okay.
It's only if they are driven from a compliance angle and there is somebody saying, a regulatory body saying, you need to comply to X, Y, Z, prove it. That's when we find there's an issue.
Nigel, this your experience?
Indeed, but let's take aspects of compliance. So certain companies may have a compliance regime that says I need to put security patches on within a timescale from them having been released, and I need to be able to demonstrate, therefore, that I've got good control over my security environment. And so if I take the cloud managed services side of the offerings we've got, the one that was based out of Portsmouth that we've already got available, that has a regime where the automated application of patches means that that's put into an environment where you've got much greater reliance upon it rather than having it through a manual or other process. And so very many clients find this a problem if you've got, I don't know, a couple of thousand servers, keeping all of the servers up to date and then keeping them all up to date in line with each other on a regular schedule. And so the ability to do that is really, really attractive from a compliance point of view. And you can either have that from a regulatory point of view or from an internal compliance with your own standards within the company. And so it depends how you're doing it. And I think Priti's point about not asking the questions, you know, the board don't really ask the questions until there's a security breach, and then they're really, really interested.
Why didn't you sort this out for us is the question.
And then they become a lot more educated. And so I think we're finding that many, many more people on the board are now much more savvy around those particular sorts of areas with security, internet access and so forth than they were a few years ago.
So there's one specifically here, and Andy's asked that question: how do you integrate your customer security into applications on the cloud? And that's directly one of the things that you were talking about there, is if you've got internal security, which might be just because a legal compliance, it might be because this is the way that you do things as a business.
Indeed, and can I give probably two answers for the two platforms, if you like? Yeah. And so with the managed service, we've got a set of security standards that we use in order to monitor, control and manage that. And basically we go through with clients and go through in detail whatever their security policy is and align that with the standards we've got and come to a conclusion of how we're running it and whether that's satisfactory. So that's a sort of normal managed service structure. With the SoftLayer side, you're very much more buying infrastructure as a service, and kind of the security standards that you set by it. We'll obviously look after the physical security, and you can come through and explore how we're doing that and go through and check us out.
But it's your business.
The client is managing what software standards go on there, what the fix regime is, what the how regularly do I refresh the operating system and keep it up to scratch. And so there are two different answers for horses for courses, I would say, in that environment. What's your view, Priti?
I think just something for the audience more about what you're talking about. When you're talking about this compliance issue and engagement, it's engagement that we see that is sometimes lacking from outside with businesses like us, and they don't always look for the companies that are accredited. So do you have the right accreditation, ISO 27001, which is a security standard? Most companies will have that, and it's in this particular process that I think there should be a lot more engagement if you want to tick all the boxes in terms of regulatory and compliance. What are we talking about? We're talking about risk assessment. These businesses that have that accreditation, what they have to do is they have to go through a process, and that process enables them to say, let's highlight all the risks within our business. So, firstly, what is the scope of that ISO 27001? Fantastic. Internal company bits. That's no good if you're a cloud provider. So you need to check the scope of the ISO. Does it meet the requirements of what your business is going to engage with, i.e. does it meet the public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud solutions? If it's there, fantastic. Next thing, engage with these companies to see, what you can do to understand that risk, how they're mitigating that risk. We touched upon performance earlier, but we didn't mention anything about the service level agreements which impact performance. And this is where if there's engagement, then you can start to mitigate some of those risks, because you can start to understand the controls and measures these companies have in place, which ultimately will affect your businesses in terms of when you decide to put your data in the cloud or not, as it might be, depending on what is mission critical to you, is what we find is really important.
Dale, is this something the Reg audience struggles with, to be able to make decisions?
People fall into different categories. There's the people who are, I would say, just getting into it, toe in the water, doing just tactical edge stuff. They tend to not worry too much, they'll just go on reputation. If it's a big brand that they're dealing with, or someone who they know is using that's similar to themselves, they'll go on that. We get organisations in between who are pretty, they're not quite sure what they should and shouldn't be asking for, and sometimes they'll focus on one regulation and actually miss a lot of the stuff that you were talking about in terms of basics of ITIL type processes. The more mature guys, and a question back to you actually, what we find is that there's something that comes up quite a bit, which is the difference between a sort of white box and black box service. So in a black box, you're kind of trusting the provider to go and do everything behind the scenes, but you don't actually have visibility as to where your data is in terms of individual devices, or any real granular view of what's going on in terms of behind the scenes activity. And then there's more white box, where they have a dashboard and they can actually see a lot more in terms of what you're up to. Even though you might be doing it for them, they can see what you're doing. And the more mature guys see, particularly if they're in more of a hybrid environment where it's their necks on the line, if you have a quality of service problem, the business comes to them first, not you. They want to actually have confidence they can see what you're doing. I mean, what's your experience of that?
I haven't heard the analogy white box and black box. That's an interesting one. Our experience with clients is that really they don't like black box. Right, and so I don't think we have any offering that is you would characterise as black box. Or one of the fantastic things about SoftLayer is the portals you get access to and the information you can get around what's going on, and the support structure. So it's completely different from sort of posting a question up there. There's something wrong with my server. Can you go and look at it sometime? As opposed to getting involved in a web chat and getting the fantastic support they can do through that route. And so both with SoftLayer and the cloud managed services offering, the one that's out of the Portsmouth location, they give you knowledge of where the data is, knowledge of what's going on. Clearly, with when we've got an initial process stack around it, you are leaving some of those aspects to us rather than managing them yourself. And so we will do those in a certain way using a certain tool set. So we don't really let that completely open and flexible. That's kind of how the service is delivered. But you are getting a cloud platform kind of on a legacy environment and in a managed way, and if you like, in a Unix environment, which is also quite unusual. So there's lots of reasons why you might want to look at that. We find clients that are also, when you put a cloud banner on something, they're a bit uncertain, and some of the legal guys fall into the same traps here because they come perhaps from an old legacy outsourcing or managed hosting provision. When you're looking at SLAs on a cloud platform, by and large, the SLAs that you'll get with probably our competitors, but also with the SoftLayer side, relate to being able to get access into the servers. And so actually, it's the network access and how you get into that, because how the application runs and how the operating system runs and how all those other things work are actually still down to you, the client. So we can't. It's pretty hard for us to give you a service level around it. Whereas clearly, when you've got the cloud managed services environment that's got the ITIL process stack, that's when you can get from us a 99.9% platinum availability and a sort of graded structure of availability levels that you'd expect in a sort of more hosted environment, but for a cloud service. And so it really is horses for courses as to what you're looking for in your different cloud environments and how that works then.
Dale, just give us a quicker answer on this, because there's a question that comes in. Can the cloud help compliance?
Yes. I mean, we find, I mean, it comes through really, really strongly in Reg research, actually. When you actually take a structured walkthrough of what people do in terms of security, privacy, compliance in their own data center, and I don't want to offend anyone out there, everyone knows that it could be done better, let's put it that way, particularly if you're in more of a mid-size or smaller organization environment. And by going to the cloud, you're working, your data is immediately transported into an environment where you've got ISO standards applied, you've got state-of-the-art access technology, physical security. You've just got so much in the way of most medium businesses or even quite large businesses would find it hard to put that level of security and
it's their business, that's what they've got to do.
Exactly.
They've got to comply themselves before they can ensure your business can comply to it. So it's definitely a lot more secure.
I'd say if you're a small or medium business, if you don't become more secure and more compliant by moving to the cloud, then you're massively the exception.
That's
correct.
That's strong.
We've got a security practice, and I was working, having a discussion with them with a client, and I was very pleased to see them talking about security in the cloud, and they said that the mere fact of having a standardized level of operating system that's common across all the servers, which is what you'd get in a cloud managed services environment once you get into it, will almost by definition be more secure than a operating system level environment where you have to differentially patch different levels of operating systems.
So there's two things that often get confused. One of them is security and the other one is trust. So security is, physically, can I protect what's there, for example. Trust is, do I trust that service provider not to do anything they shouldn't be doing with my data? And that's a totally different question. And obviously the press, with a lot of stories that we hear, it's talked about as if it's security, but it's not actually. It's to do with
you can't trust the people.
You can't trust the provider to do
what they say they're doing.
Exactly.
We are going to get onto that. And actually, I just want to get us through onto that because I want to give it enough time. What do you want to say about this, Nigel? This is stealing.
Yeah, just one of the points around security, and this kind of leads in and informs some of the rest of the conversation. With the control that you have over the servers, you're really controlling the security. Yes, we control the physical environment. The principal area of the security on the SoftLayer side around the network is on this triple tier architecture. So you've got isolation in different ports of the public network, the management network, if you like, that will put in place to allow data transfer and data backups over the network, which isn't charged, incidentally, and we don't charge on that data backup element to replicate to other different SoftLayer data centers, or the private side where you're connecting in through your dedicated lines. So those are all three isolated from each other, which enables, if you're comfortable with VLAN isolation, which most people are, then you're going to be comfortable with the security level in the cloud, because it's on a dedicated bare metal server. It's your server, your hypervisor, your virtualization pattern. You're managing that essentially. So you could virtually think of it as in your data center, but connected through a VLAN. So that's a precursor, if you like, to some of the rest of the conversation.
Well, let's move on to this, because this is my favourite slide of the whole thing, and it goes to Fernando's question that he asked a while ago now. So I hope you're still here, Fernando, because this is for you. So he says, how can I trust where my data is stored in the cloud when I have to comply with privacy legislation in the EU? So it's directly to what Dale was saying about trust, and it's also directly to what's being said in Europe in this sort of post-Snowden era. Now, these points are points that actually you brought up, Nigel, for us. Yeah.
Indeed, and we think it should be clients driving where they want to put their data, rather than governments legislating around it, I think is the main point around this. And so some people have had negative reaction to it, and our responses around this on the next chart just cover some of that. Those. And so therefore we regard that almost as anti-competitive, and much better left to the commercial environment to sort it out.
Well, to be fair, there's a lot of people who are saying now, well, we do have to, we have to trust someone, because what we found out is that our data is not, we cannot trust Indeed. Service providers to act how we thought they were acting.
Indeed, and the service providers have to be quite upfront about what their policy is in this area, and we've just recently come out with some very, very strong statements that are available on the Smarter Planet blog if you go on the web, but we made statements, for example, that we've not provided data to the NSA or any other government agency under the program known as PRISM, which people talk about. Yes. Right? We've not provided client data to the NSA or any other government agency to involve bulk collection of data or content. Right? We don't put in back doors for anyone to get access into any data. We have not provided client data for anything stored outside the US to the US government under any NSA order or FISA or national security order. So we just haven't done that. We don't do it. And we come out with the policy statements now that are saying that in a way, because all of our clients are enterprise clients, if you like, and they're not consumers, which is a different sort of concern people might have in dealing with companies who deal with consumers a lot, because they maybe have different behaviours. We say to anyone who wants to see our clients' data, typically goes to our clients. So if we get a request for any data, we say, well, don't come and ask us, it's our clients' data, go and ask them. And if somebody comes to try and get that from us with a gag order, we will resist that with every judicial process available to us in every country. And we'll conform with all the laws in those countries. So these statements are, I think, coming out very, very strongly and saying that this is our position, and we believe other providers in the industry should come forward and state theirs, so as clients can have the similar level of confidence around what you will and won't do.
I mean, I can see that at the moment we're in a difficult time because a lot of providers have been caught with their trousers down about this.
Yeah.
You should be working as an industry together, because that's why these things that were in the last slide, if we can get that back, that's why these things come up. That's why people can exploit this, is because you don't know who to trust. I can see where you come out with these strong statements.
Yeah.
But
But it'd be wrong, we think, of the industry to be guided by governments who want to fragment that to have local in-country facilities, right? We think it's absolutely fine for clients to want to have their data located in-country rather than somewhere off in a cloud on a regional basis where they don't know, but leave that to the clients to drive, not for governments to drive, I think is our strong message.
Dale, what do you think? What do you think of this? I mean, there are a lot of providers in a very difficult situation at the moment, aren't there, when we're talking about establishing trust?
There are. Well, two things. Firstly, a lot of these discussions do take place in the B2C space, where the providers are talking about consumer data as opposed to business-to-business stuff that IBM focuses on. And to be fair, I would say that those providers that do have both a consumer and a business thread to their activity do tend to apply different policies and have different contracts and so on. So my own view is there's a lot of there's a lot of noise, and it's not that there aren't issues in here, but I would agree with Nigel. It's more a case of working out what it means to you, as opposed to just blanket assuming that there's some generic exposure if you work with an organisation that's American, because they'll just have to be a puppet to the US government. I mean, you've got to be sensible about it, I think, and just work through the issues. So,
Priti?
I think from a provider's perspective, it's a really difficult position to be in, because obviously you've got your customer obligations and you've got your legal obligations, and both need to be fulfilled. So yes, the data does belong to the customer, and I agree with you, Nigel. It'd be fantastic if the customer could make that ultimate request. But they've also probably got a legal requirement which they've got to comply to. And if the government says, oh, that's the be and end all, what do we do?
Yeah, but I mean, again, you've got to look at different types of cloud services as well, because a lot of problems we've seen have been around SaaS in particular. So there, the provider is, they know exactly what data structure is, they know what the data means, they know how it's organised, they can run their own reports on it for a government agency if they were asked. If someone is just hosting your application, even your operating system on a basically raw tin, and you feel that there's an exposure, apply encryption, apply whatever auditing capability, whatever you need to give yourself confidence. So I don't think it's possible to have a generic response to this. You need
I need to get to these two questions. The first one is from Rob. It's a quick one from Rob. You don't give stuff to the NSA. He says, how do you know they don't nick it anyway?
I think you have to give some trust in our security of our systems, and we know what we're talking about and how we run services. So.
Okay, that's fair enough. Fernando's got a follow-up, and it's this is quite important. He said the real problem is that compliance with the directive on privacy with data in the cloud, it's not an easy thing to do, but the sanctions are severe if you don't get it right.
Correct.
So, Priti, how would you manage that with him if he was one of your clients?
This is where you need to sort of look at the small print, the terms and conditions of what you're signing up to with your providers, and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and negotiate those terms appropriately. So in this particular instance, you may put the onus on the client. However, you still have a legal obligation, as we said earlier, which would need to be spelt out to them, that we've both got legal obligations that we need to fulfil, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I would say just put that risk in perspective as well. So look at how you're doing it at the moment. If you have a burglary and someone steals your server, or a disgruntled employee decides they're going to make data, the point I'm trying to make is that the risk of putting it into the cloud probably is much lower than the risk mitigation of putting it in the cloud compared to everything else that might go wrong in terms of data leaking. So you just got to stay sensible, I think. Okay, let's move on from that to get through some stuff. You've got a couple of customer examples here, Nigel, haven't you?
Indeed. Kulu recently signed up with us on the SoftLayer front. I'm a kind of grey-haired guy, and so I'm not big into gaming, I must say. But the gaming industry is a really serious industry, and it has very high requirements in terms of performance, flexibility, and location as the gaming clients move around the world in time zones as time goes on. And so their requirements are actually very similar in many ways to the highest of our other clients' requirements in a commercial environment. And so their selection of the SoftLayer platform for us is a continuing endorsement of the robustness and flexibility in that platform. So we were very pleased when they came around and signed up.
Let's whip through these. I don't like
Silver Sky is another business partner. Business partners are very important to us. Acuutech here. We're talking about folks like Logicalis and others because of a geographic distribution. But Silver Sky signed up as well in order to provide security to mail services in the cloud. Something that will resonate with many clients as to how do they get those sorts of things. And so Silver Sky were another example of a business partner who signed up. So just wanted to throw those in as the real people are using these. I think there were 21,000 clients we had for SoftLayer when they signed up, and there were 2,400 who signed up in the first quarter after we signed them, and another 2,400 signed up in the next quarter after that. And so it's definitely proving to be a very competitive platform at the moment.
I suppose one of the things that they got now is because you've got sort of deep pockets, and there's always people that are resistant to, your data. You've got to put your data with someone that is going to be around and continue to invest in the service. Exactly. And it's quite a big investment, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And that helps build out on a DR front, which I'm sure we'll touch on shortly.
We will shortly. First of all, I'm going to give Mike's question. I think this is for you, Priti. He's been looking at the website, and the only European data centres in Amsterdam?
Whose?
I don't know. He doesn't say who it's for.
For SoftLayer?
For SoftLayer. That's for you, isn't it? Yes.
Absolutely right. No,
it's a SoftLayer one.
He's absolutely right. So the current...
Concentrate more.
When we bought SoftLayer, they had 13 data centres, 11 in the US, one in Singapore and one in Amsterdam. And so the previous chart that had all the dots on was showing...
I should look at the chart.
Showing we were building out 25 centres. So the SoftLayer one in Amsterdam will be supplemented in second quarter by one in London. So you'll be able to replicate data between London and Amsterdam to keep all your data in EU to meet your regulatory requirements if you're in EU, and that will be supplemented with Frankfurt and Paris in 2014. So we'll have a good selection of different locations to use for SoftLayer. Currently, today, he's absolutely right, there's only Amsterdam.
Only Amsterdam.
But London will be within the
M25. Within the M25 and within the second quarter. Can you give us a month on that?
No.
Yes.
Not at this point, but the second quarter isn't too far away. And if you start ordering, by the time you get to putting stuff on there, you're going to have a data center.
You've got to go
ready.
through the IBM process.
No, it's not an IBM process. That's partly the whole point, because one of the reasons for buying them is you kind of soft layer. You can click on and get up live running very, very quickly.
Okay.
Credit cards and the rest of it. So.
That's enough of that sort of.
Yeah. No, but if you say it's slow IBM process, that's the whole thing of the complete difference between the SoftLayer and the IBM side. So I couldn't let you get away with that one. So.
Okay, that's all right. Fair enough. So now let's move on to. I think it's sort of our last section, isn't it? This disaster recovery and looking at this. This is yours, Priti. I assume this is not your head office, is it, Priti? No.
Absolutely not. But as it says, these are real live examples. You never expect it just happens. What happens?
This is the head office of your customers.
No comment. So a lot of you recognise this building. This is when those Tottenham riots kicked in 2011. That was a building that was in flames. And the first thing a managing partner of this firm saw, he was away on holiday, switched his telly on, and he saw his building burning down. And he thought, oh my God, what's happened? And then he realised his data's in the cloud, but his telecoms was also in the cloud. So Monday morning, it was business as normal for them.
What sort of business was it?
This is an interesting thing. They're in the top 5 criminal law firm, and they have been in the cloud since 2004. So they've gone through all the compliance and regulatory requirements since 2004, ticking all the boxes. And luckily, they were in the cloud, because they would not have a business today if they were not in the cloud. The other example there is a Soho fire. That was back in 2009. A similar sort of situation. This situation, it was business as normal. The FD was trading with the States in the afternoon, actually watching his building burning down as well. So 2 real live examples of a cloud is the way to be going.
Is disaster recovery, this sort of things, business continuity thing, is this a big driver for Reg readers to the cloud?
It's something that people discover as they get into it. It's not necessarily the reason that they've gone to the cloud in the first place.
Not the reason, no.
But suddenly they find, if you ask them, would you go back? One of the reasons for not going back is disaster recovery and that kind of flexibility to, they've gone in there because they can access the cloud service from anywhere. And then they found out, well, actually, that just allows us to recover from a disaster.
Well, I suppose the problem with if you go back, you then have to establish a new process and create and go through that proving it internally that you can actually do this, as well as the thing that you've
and the trouble with the trouble with disaster recovery in general is it's a bit like insurance. It's very hard to put a business case around based on an event that you hope will never happen and may not happen. And traditionally, if you are going to look at disaster recovery, even if it's just protecting your data, there's an awful lot of cost and an awful lot of process that goes around it if you're managing that yourself. You kind of hand that problem to these guys when you go in the cloud. It's just one less thing to worry about, and they're going to do it damn sight better than you are anyway, unless you spend a lot of money and a lot of time and effort on it, which most people.
Do you think it should be higher up the agenda when people are thinking of moving to the cloud? I mean, I know from what you're saying, it's rotten to write about because no one ever reads the thing that you write, because it's not a thing that people put on their A list of decision-making principles.
I mean, what we have tracked over the last sort of 7 or 8 years is from an IT, from a business, a senior business perspective, they've got a lot more risk aware, particularly around security and with some of the natural disasters and things. It depends on the part of the world as to how sensitive people are to this. But if you play the risk card, if you played the risk card, a decade ago, it wasn't going to be a particularly big part of your business case for a lot of organisations, but today it is. So it's worth working into that business case or justification for the move.
I think anyone who's got a really serious audit group at the moment, which is sort of most companies, they're going to come in and they say, have you got a DR policy on your data? It's a sort of, you can't operate without it, so it's just such a huge risk to the business in case it did happen, because most businesses these days cannot run with the IT that they are using internally. So therefore it's a perfectly reasonable question for the auditors to ask.
And the thing is, sorry,
just something on what Nigel just said, it's fantastic having a policy, but you've got to put it into practice. And from our experience, what we find is a lot of firms don't necessarily always put it into practice, and that's why they should go through that risk mitigation.
Don't test it, right?
Yes,
it's great. I've got it down on a piece of paper that we've got a DR strategy. Well, how often do you test it? The auditors are now not, mostly, I believe, not letting people get away with the fact that they've got a plan. They said, well, okay, when did you last test it? And so we work with banks who've got regulators who say you have to put this in place and test it. And so it's a material part of what needs to go on. I think in the past it's been something I think that slowed people going to the cloud, because it's very hard. You've got to redesign all your old applications before you put them on the web to take advantage of all the cloud characteristics of multiple different resilience centres and such like. So, but I think it's moved on from there.
So one of my colleagues, the Dark Lord, Tony, hi Tony if you're watching.
He will be. Tony watches all of these.
He's been doing some work recently just looking at using the cloud as to provide DR capability for on-premise IT infrastructure, because a lot of people, they've invested a lot in their data centers. They've got no real reason to move things for the sake of it, but actually maintaining a DR facility is expensive and it is a lot of hassle. And because a lot of organisations now have moved to virtualising the server element, actually shifting a VM to someone else's data centre and spinning it up there for recovery purposes is a pretty obvious thing to do, really, provided there are no you've worked through all the other things that we've been talking about. So that's coming up a lot more now in terms of DR.
Okay, Nigel, briefly, what do you want to say about the scenarios here?
I think probably scenario A is one that people would prefer to avoid if they could, because having to do disaster recovery between continents is a bit extravagant. The one that the people would typically go to, I think by preference would be scenario B, with having copies in region. So, for example, the cloud managed service out of Portsmouth, we've got a DR capability in Greenford that can fall back to. So as a managed service, it will fall back as a cloud into there. The SoftLayer side, once we've built London, you can then fall back into Amsterdam. At the moment, Amsterdam would have a problem falling back to anywhere in Europe, but clearly as we develop through this year, you're going to have many more options.
And I do think that level of granularity is useful, because we have had instances, as we've seen reported in the press, of regions coming down for service providers, and for a period of time, you've got an outage because your DR is within region, and but then you've got all the compliance and the other things we've just been talking about, data sovereignty questions, let's say, rather than issues, if you're going to DR between regions. Plus, obviously, as you were saying, you don't want necessarily that wide area overhead. So actually having more granularity within a region makes a lot of sense for the business.
And these are practical things that you've got to work through. You can't just say, we're going to get disaster recovery with this. It's disaster recovery to where, and with what kind of service.
And a kind of a final point here, there is some guidance around this, as you've got on the chart that's up here, around how to do DR with a SoftLayer thing. But one of the key things around the SoftLayer side, in order to DR, you have to move your data from one centre into another centre, or maybe two additional centres, in order to have data in different places in multiple copies. The significant differentiator around SoftLayer around this is that you don't get charged on network traffic. Once you're in, you can move the data around.
Once you're in, you're in.
So that's a material distinction from other providers who you can get very large network bills when you decide to just replicate another copy just because you need to get a bit more security around it, and so it makes a big difference. That.
Also, one of the things I think a lot of people, from our experience, tend to get confused on is there's disaster recovery, but then there's business continuity. Okay, and often, at the higher end of decision making, people don't understand the difference between the two. And when you talk about regional sites and data replication and wherever your data may be stored, if you've got legacy apps that don't lend themselves to being distributed or being replicated correctly, these are the sort of things that, the questions that I wish our clients would ask and the audience should be considering when they're looking at their DR plans, and often they're not. It's just great, I've got a DR plan, I've ticked the box, it's working. In reality, it's the apps that actually decide whether you want BC or not.
So we've had some good practical advice, and as we get to the end now, just got a few minutes to go, so we need to leave anyone who's been watching this and hopefully taking notes, we need to leave them with something that they're going to be able to say, all right, from now on, I'm going to go off and I'm going to do this. I'm going to think about it this way. Dale, this is your sort of, arrow to the future kind of slide.
Anyone who's participated on a research will have seen the sort of analysis we do when we go out. We might talk to a few hundred people, 1,000 people on their experiences in a particular area. Within any sort of survey we do, we get a group of guys at one end who are really experienced, been there, done that, got the scars, figured out what the best ways of doing these things, and then we got people at the other end who are only just getting into it, starting to sort of figure out which way is up. and a bunch of people in the middle. And what we find in terms of data location, with all of the sort of dimensions of it we've been discussing over the last hour or so, is that as you go through and accumulate more experience, these things become more and more obvious. So when you're sort of kicking around with test and dev environments, you tend not to worry too much. You're not using live data anyway. When you start scaling up, you might get some questions from the business people around compliance, and ultimately when you've got a big, hairy solution out there that the business is dependent on, big customer-facing website, you really have to start thinking about performance, DR, and all these kind of things. So I guess my message is hopefully, kind of stuff we've been talking about today, have a think about them up front, because the problem with cloud services often is they're so easy to get into, and they're so easy to just perpetuate that kind of quick and dirty mindset that you
sign up quickly and you're not 100% in control of what you sign up for.
Even if you're not going to activate a lot of this stuff up front, at least ask the questions, as Priti was saying, and just make sure that you're mindful of the fact if this thing grows and takes off and starts to escalate, you're going to be able to deal with these kind of issues.
I mean, our time's basically up, so I'm going to give you one more sentence each on stuff that people have to do. Who wants to take it first? Nigel, you know what you want to say.
I'm going to line you up for another conversation on the register, which is around OpenStack, because your point about the flexibility of moving in and out of clouds is absolutely right. If you get into proprietary set of protocols and APIs and things like that, you're a bit stuck. So I predict this year you'll get much more interest around the OpenStack side and conforming around there, and that's where some of the hot action is going to be.
We know, there's definitely a lot of activity when we write about that sort of thing. Priti, what should people be doing going away from this?
I think they need to build confidence by engaging. So building confidence within the business. So IT departments and IT people in this audience absolutely understand the cloud and know where it's going, but they need to bring everybody else on board, and that means they've got to engage a lot better with the providers they're working with.
Great. Thanks. We're out of time, guys, and so I have to just wrap this all up. We've got some links as well for you there. Remember that there is an on-demand version of this. If you've just watched the on-demand version of this, you know that already. Send us, thanks for all the comments today. Let us know what you thought of this. If you want some more of this, if you want an OpenStack Regcast with Nigel returning to the studio, then please ask for it and we'll do it for you. That's how it works. That's how it works around here. So I hope you liked our new studio. Vulture's going to be back soon again for some more Regcasts. And so I just want to say thank you very much to the panel. Thank you, panel. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I've been Tim Phillips, and for the Register, goodbye.